The evening sky was dim with clouds when Keanu Reeves walked slowly down the street toward a small diner. He was dressed in very simple clothes, nothing that would make him stand out. His jeans were old, his jacket looked faded, and a baseball cap hid much of his face. To the people passing by, he looked like an ordinary man, maybe even someone struggling. But Keanu liked it that way. He wanted to feel invisible, to walk into a place without anyone treating him like a celebrity. More than that, he wanted to see how people treated strangers when they didn't know who they were. This diner was not just any diner. Unknown to almost everyone inside, Keanu was the secret owner. He had invested in the place years ago because he believed in simple food, friendly service, and fair prices. Tonight, he decided to test those values for himself. The neon sign buzzed softly as he pushed the glass door open. A little bell above the frame jingled, announcing his entrance. The warm smell of coffee and freshly baked bread wrapped around him. There were a few families eating together, a couple of workers having late meals, and some teenagers laughing over milkshakes. At first, no one paid attention to him. He found a seat near the back, in a quiet corner, and slid into the booth. He sat with his shoulders slightly bent, his cap still on, his presence quiet. It didn't take long before a waitress noticed him. She was carrying plates to another table when her eyes landed on Keanu. Her expression shifted. She frowned, whispering something to another staff member as she walked back toward the counter. She didn't bring him water, didn't hand him a menu, didn't smile like she had for the other customers. Instead, she stood at the far end, looking at him with suspicion. A couple of other diners followed her gaze and turned their heads. Keanu noticed the way people's eyes moved over him, his worn jacket, his tired look, the simple cap. He could almost hear their thoughts, he looks homeless. He doesn't belong here. Minutes passed before the waitress finally walked over. Her steps were slow, and her tone was sharp. "Can I help you?" she asked, but there was no warmth in her voice. Keanu smiled gently. "Yes, please. Could I have a bowl of soup?" His voice was soft, polite. The waitress raised an eyebrow. She looked him up and down and let out a small laugh that wasn't friendly. "Soup? We don't serve the homeless here," she said. Her words cut through the air, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. A hush fell across the diner. Keanu froze in his seat. He wasn't shocked for himself. He had faced coldness before in his life, but he was stunned that these words could be said in a place he had built to be kind. His heart ached more for the message itself than the insult. "We don't serve the homeless." Those words carried the weight of judgment, cruelty, and rejection. Around the diner, whispers began. Some people smirked and nodded, as if they agreed with the waitress. A man in a business suit shook his head with a mocking smile, while two teenagers laughed quietly at the scene. On the other side, a mother tried to cover her young son's ears when he asked loudly, "Why can't that man eat here, Mommy?" She pulled him close, embarrassed, but her eyes betrayed discomfort at the harsh treatment. Keanu remained still, his expression calm. He had spent years living humbly, eating simple meals on the street, riding subways, and avoiding luxury despite his wealth. He understood what it felt like to be overlooked. But hearing those words inside his own diner made his chest heavy. He tried again, his voice steady. "I can pay for it," he said kindly. "Just one bowl of soup." The waitress crossed her arms, unimpressed. "Sir, I said we don't serve people like you. Please leave before there's a problem." Her tone grew harsher. She glanced toward the counter, signaling for the manager. The manager walked over briskly, his tie crooked, his face serious. He barely glanced at Keanu before making his judgment. "We have standards here," he said firmly. "If you can't meet them, then you'll need to leave." The diner grew even quieter. Forks paused halfway to mouths. People held their breaths, curious about what the stranger would do. Keanu sat frozen for a long moment, his eyes moving slowly around the room. He saw the mix of pity, mockery, and silence. Only a few looked genuinely uncomfortable with the situation. Inside, his thoughts swirled. This was supposed to be a place of warmth, of fairness. A place where no one was turned away. And yet, here he was judged, dismissed, and denied food. Not because of who he was, but because of who they thought he was. He pushed his chair back slowly, the sound scraping lightly against the floor. The waitress smirked, thinking she had won, that she had rid the diner of someone unworthy. The manager folded his arms, ready to escort him out. Keanu stood, his figure tall and calm, but his silence heavier than any anger could have been. He did not shout. He did not argue. He simply froze for a moment, taking in every detail: the faces, the eyes, the cruelty, the judgment. The busboy near the counter, young and new, watched the entire scene with wide eyes. He had recognized Keanu the moment he walked in, but he stayed quiet, unsure what to do. Now, watching his hero being humiliated, his heart pounded. He wanted to speak but hesitated, caught between fear and courage. Keanu adjusted his cap slightly, his mind clear. For now, he would let them reveal themselves. He would let them show the world how they treated those they thought were powerless. And then, when the moment came, he would reveal the truth. The air inside the diner grew tense. No one moved, no one spoke. The smell of soup and coffee hung in the silence, mixed with the sharp taste of judgment. And in that silence, Keanu's calm presence was louder than all the whispers combined. Whispers filled the diner after the waitress's sharp words and the manager's cold decision. The sound was low but steady, like a current of judgment running through the room. Keanu could hear the voices, the small laughs, the sighs of disapproval. Some customers leaned closer to each other, talking quietly about the homeless man who dared to sit in the corner booth. Others looked away, choosing silence over kindness, unwilling to stand up for him. In those moments, Keanu saw the truth about people: how quick they could be to judge, how fast they could decide who was worthy of respect and who was not. A man in a gray business suit at a nearby table leaned back in his chair and muttered, "Some people think they can just walk into any place. They should know better." His tone carried both arrogance and mockery, as if he had the right to decide who belonged in the diner. Two teenagers sitting by the window nudged each other and laughed under their breath. One of them whispered, "Bet he hasn't eaten in days. Look at his clothes." They saw a story in his appearance, and without asking, they believed it. But not everyone was cruel. A little boy sitting with his mother couldn't stop staring. He pulled at her sleeve and asked, "Mommy, why can't the man have soup? He looks hungry." His innocent voice rose above the whispers, making the mother blush with embarrassment. She quickly shushed him, afraid of drawing attention, but deep in her heart, she felt a pang of guilt. She knew her son's question was simple truth. Keanu sat quietly, his hands resting on the table, his eyes calm but heavy. He remembered the days of his own life when he had lived simply, moving around without luxury, eating wherever he could, never wanting more than enough to survive. He had seen hardship, loss, and loneliness. He knew what it felt like to be looked at as though you did not matter. That memory made him understand the cruelty of this moment even more deeply. Still, he kept his voice steady as he spoke again. "I can pay for the soup," he said gently, his tone polite and quiet. "Just one bowl, please." The waitress gave a harsh laugh and shook her head. "Didn't you hear me the first time? We don't serve people like you here." She turned toward the counter, calling the manager again. The manager returned, his arms folded across his chest, his face already set with disapproval. He didn't ask questions. He didn't bother to look carefully. He made his decision without care. "Sir," he said firmly, "we have standards. You need to leave now before this becomes a problem." The room fell silent again, all eyes on Keanu. Some customers looked excited, enjoying the drama as if it were a show. Others frowned but stayed quiet, unwilling to risk confrontation. No one moved to help. Keanu stayed still, his body calm, but inside he was measuring the weight of the moment. The diner was meant to be a safe place, a place of warmth and service. It was built with his vision, his values. Yet here he was, the owner, being treated as less than human because of his clothes and the assumptions tied to them. He slowly looked around the diner, his eyes landing on each table. He saw the smirks, the mocking smiles, the indifferent faces. He also noticed the few who looked away in shame, people who seemed to know this was wrong but chose silence. His heart felt heavy, not for himself, but for the way kindness was so easily abandoned. The little boy spoke again, louder this time, "But why can't he eat, Mommy?" His voice carried across the room. The mother's cheeks burned red, and she pulled her child close, whispering for him to be quiet. Yet her eyes, now glancing toward Keanu, were filled with regret. Keanu's voice, soft and steady, broke the silence. "I am not here to cause trouble. I just wanted something warm." His words were humble, spoken without anger. But they carried a weight that made some people shift uncomfortably in their seats. The manager, unmoved, shook his head. "This place isn't for everyone. Please leave before I call security." The waitress folded her arms, her smirk still on her face, certain she was right. To her, he was just another man who did not deserve a seat, not deserving of a meal. She never imagined that the man she dismissed was the very person who signed her paycheck. A young busboy stood near the counter, holding an empty tray. His eyes were wide, his face pale. He had recognized Keanu the moment he walked in. He had seen him in movies, in interviews, and in the news. He knew exactly who was sitting in that booth. But fear kept him silent. He was new, just a boy working to earn a little money, and he wasn't sure what would happen if he spoke. Still, his heart pounded in his chest. He wanted to defend Keanu. Keanu slowly pushed his chair back, the wooden legs scraping against the floor. The sound echoed in the silent diner. He stood, his tall figure calm and steady, his face still hidden beneath the cap. He did not shout, he did not argue, but his silence carried more power than anger ever could. He simply froze there for a moment, letting the weight of the scene settle over everyone in the room. Every eye in the diner was fixed on him. Some were eager, some were ashamed, and some were simply curious. No one knew the truth yet. No one understood that this man, the one they were so quick to judge, held the keys to the very building they sat in. Keanu looked once more around the room. He could see how people revealed their hearts in moments like this. Some chose cruelty, some chose silence, but very few chose kindness. And in that realization, he felt a deep sadness. This was more than a test of a diner's staff, it was a mirror of society itself. The air was thick with tension, the smell of coffee and fried food mixing with the bitterness of judgment. Keanu stood quietly, his face calm, his thoughts clear. He knew he would reveal the truth soon. But first, he wanted to see how far the judgment would go. The waitress tapped her foot impatiently, the manager crossed his arms tighter, and the customers leaned in closer, waiting for the next moment. But Keanu remained still, his silence heavier than any words. And in that silence, the lesson began to take shape, even before it was spoken. The tension inside the diner was sharp enough to be felt in every corner. Keanu stood tall in his booth, his cap still pulled low, his jacket looking worn, his appearance still that of an ordinary man. But behind those calm eyes, something was changing. He had watched long enough, listened long enough, and felt the weight of enough judgment to know this was the moment. The young busboy at the counter clutched his tray, his heart racing. He wanted to say something, but the fear of losing his job kept him quiet. Everyone else sat frozen, waiting to see what the stranger would do. The waitress folded her arms, her face proud, as though she had done something honorable by protecting the diner. The manager stood near her, firm and cold, confident in his choice to deny service. The silence stretched longer and longer, broken only by the hum of the ceiling fan and the clink of a spoon in someone's coffee cup. Finally, Keanu lifted his hands to the brim of his cap. Slowly, almost casually, he pulled it off. His hair, slightly messy but familiar, caught the light. His face, calm and gentle, became visible to everyone. Gasps echoed through the diner like a sudden storm. That's Keanu Reeves," a woman whispered, her eyes wide. The teenagers by the window nearly dropped their milkshakes, their laughter instantly dying. The businessman's smirk vanished, replaced by shock. The mother covered her mouth, her son staring with wide eyes, now realizing the homeless man was someone famous. The waitress blinked rapidly, her face losing all its color. The manager, frozen, swallowed hard, his confidence dissolving in an instant. The busboy let out a shaky breath, relieved that the truth was finally revealed. Keanu looked around the room, his eyes calm but piercing. He didn't need to raise his voice. He simply said, "So you don't serve the homeless in my diner?" His words carried across the room, steady and clear. The weight of his voice pressed down on everyone, heavier than anger, heavier than shouting. Every table fell silent, every eye glued to him. The waitress stammered, her lips trembling. I didn't know. I didn't realize." The manager's arms dropped to his sides. He cleared his throat, but no words came out. His earlier pride and firmness had turned into fear and regret. Keanu remained calm. He was not there to embarrass, but the truth of the moment spoke for itself. "You judged me by my clothes," he said softly. "You judged me by how you thought I looked. Not by who I am. Not by what I asked." The words hit harder than any anger could. Several customers lowered their heads in shame. The boy tugged his mother's arm again, whispering, "See, Mommy. I told you." The busboy stepped forward now, courage rising in him. "This is Mr. Reeves," he said to the stunned crowd. "This diner belongs to him. He's the reason we all have jobs here." The room exploded with whispers. People gasped again, shaking their heads in disbelief. A few customers pulled out their phones, not to laugh this time, but to capture the moment. The waitress looked down, unable to meet his eyes, her earlier arrogance gone completely. Keanu looked at her, then at the manager, then at the room full of people who had either mocked or stayed silent. "What if I really was homeless?" he asked quietly. "Would that mean I don't deserve a meal? Would that mean kindness should be denied?" His voice was steady, and though he spoke softly, the entire diner heard every word. A heavy silence followed, and many people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The businessman who had mocked him earlier now looked down at his plate, unable to lift his eyes. The teenagers put away their phones, their faces red with embarrassment. The mother finally spoke, her voice trembling, "You're right. I should have said something. I'm sorry." Keanu nodded, accepting her words without judgment. He turned back to the waitress and manager. They were both pale, sweating, their earlier pride turned into dread. "I never asked for special treatment," he said. "I only asked for soup. But you refused, not because of policy, not because of rules, but because of judgment. That's not what this diner is supposed to be." His words hung in the air, impossible to ignore. The staff stood frozen, their hearts pounding, realizing the weight of what they had done. Keanu slowly sat back down in the booth. He set his cap on the table and folded his hands in front of him. "I'll ask one more time," he said gently. "May I have a bowl of soup?" The waitress's lips trembled. Her hands shook as she turned toward the counter. She whispered to the cook in the kitchen, who had been watching the scene unfold with wide eyes. The cook nodded quickly, already preparing the order. The busboy hurried to bring water to Keanu's table, his hands steady now with purpose. The entire diner remained silent, watching in awe as the man they had dismissed just moments ago sat quietly, calm and forgiving. Keanu's presence carried a dignity that no insult could shake. The soup arrived a few minutes later, steaming hot, the aroma filling the room. The busboy placed it gently in front of him, his voice soft as he said, "Here you go, sir." Keanu nodded, offering him a small smile. "Thank you." As he picked up the spoon and began to eat, the tension in the diner shifted. People watched, but now with respect, not judgment. Some whispered apologies under their breath, others looked ashamed, and a few even wiped tears from their eyes. The waitress stood at the counter, tears forming, realizing how close she had come to losing everything with her cruelty. The manager leaned against the wall, his face pale, his thoughts racing with regret. Keanu ate slowly, savoring each bite, not because of the soup itself, but because of the lesson being written in that room. He didn't need to raise his voice, didn't need to shout or punish. His calmness was the punishment, his dignity the lesson. By the time he set his spoon down, the entire diner was transformed. The people inside knew they would never forget the moment when a simple bowl of soup revealed so much about kindness, judgment, and humanity. The diner remained hushed as Keanu placed his spoon down gently on the table. The steam from the empty bowl rose slowly, curling in the air like the memory of what had just taken place. Everyone was still watching him, though no one dared to speak. The weight of his quiet presence pressed against their hearts. His calmness was more powerful than shouting could ever be. It was as though his silence itself was teaching a lesson. Keanu sat back in the booth, his posture relaxed, his expression thoughtful. The busboy, still standing nearby, kept glancing at him with nervous pride. He felt relieved that Keanu had finally been served, but his heart still ached over how everything had unfolded. He wondered if his hero would fire the manager and the waitress on the spot. That was what anyone else would have done. But Keanu was not like anyone else. After a moment, Keanu stood slowly and turned to face the diners. His tall figure seemed even taller now, not because of his fame, but because of the dignity he carried. His voice, when he spoke, was soft but steady. "I didn't come here to cause a scene," he said. "I only wanted a bowl of soup. But tonight, I saw something much larger than a simple meal." The customers leaned in, their eyes fixed on him. The waitress lowered her head, tears threatening to spill, her earlier arrogance shattered. The manager shifted uncomfortably, his face pale, as if the floor might open and swallow him. Keanu continued, "Kindness is not about who someone appears to be. It's not about their clothes, or the money you think they do or don't have. Kindness should be given freely, because every person deserves dignity." His words flowed with quiet strength, each syllable deliberate. He wasn't lecturing, he was reminding. The mother who had silenced her son earlier now felt her eyes sting with tears. She reached for his hand, squeezing it gently, realizing that her child's innocent question had carried more truth than her silence. The boy looked at Keanu with wide, admiring eyes, as if he had just witnessed a real-life hero. Keanu glanced around the diner, his gaze moving from one table to another. "What if I really was homeless?" he asked softly. "Would that mean I don't deserve to eat? Would that mean I don't deserve respect?" His voice didn't rise, yet his words echoed in the hearts of everyone present. A deep silence followed. People shifted in their seats, avoiding his eyes, realizing the truth of his words. Some looked ashamed, others thoughtful, but no one could ignore the lesson. The waitress suddenly broke down. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she stepped forward, her voice trembling. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I thought I was protecting this place. I thought you didn't belong here. I was wrong." Her hands shook as she wrung her apron, her pride gone, replaced by regret. Keanu looked at her with kindness in his eyes. He didn't raise his voice, didn't show anger. "We all make mistakes," he said gently. "What matters is whether we learn from them." The manager cleared his throat, trying to find words, but his lips quivered. "Mr. Reeves," he finally managed, "please forgive me. I should never have treated you that way. I should never have judged so quickly." His voice was low, heavy with shame. Keanu nodded slowly, accepting their words but not letting them escape the weight of what had happened. "This diner was built on the idea that everyone is welcome," he said. "Whether they're rich, poor, young, or old. This is not just a business, it is a place where dignity should always be respected. Tonight, that was forgotten. That cannot happen again." The staff stood frozen, absorbing every word. The waitress wiped her eyes. The manager bowed his head. Even the cook in the kitchen leaned against the doorway, listening closely. Then Keanu did something no one expected. He smiled softly. "I don't want anyone to be punished," he said. "I only want this lesson remembered. Every single person who comes through that door must be treated with respect. Not because of who they might be, but because of who they already are, human." The customers began to clap softly. It started with one or two, hesitant at first, then spread across the room until the sound filled the diner. It wasn't applause for a movie star, it was gratitude for the lesson he had shared. Keanu raised his hand lightly, quieting the room again. "Kindness costs nothing," he said. "But its value is endless. Tonight, I hope we all remember that." The busboy's chest swelled with pride. He felt inspired, stronger than before, as though he had been part of something larger than himself. He would never forget this night. The waitress approached timidly. "Can I at least bring you something else? On the house?" she asked, her voice still trembling. Keanu shook his head kindly. "No, thank you. The soup was enough." He glanced at her gently. "But from now on, make sure no one else hears the words I heard tonight." She nodded quickly, tears streaming, whispering, "I promise." The manager, his voice heavy, added, "We'll change. I'll make sure of it." Keanu gave a small nod, then picked up his cap from the table. He didn't put it back on just yet. Instead, he held it in his hand as he looked once more around the diner. "Every one of us has a choice every day," he said softly. "We can choose judgment, or we can choose compassion. Tonight, you saw both. I hope tomorrow you choose better." He turned to leave, but before he reached the door, the little boy's voice rang out. "Mr. Reeves?" Keanu paused, turning back. The boy smiled brightly. "Thank you for teaching everyone." A warm smile spread across Keanu's face. "No, young man," he replied kindly, "thank you for reminding us." With that, he pushed open the glass door, the small bell jingling once more as he stepped out into the cool night air. The diner remained silent behind him, the customers and staff alike sitting in thought, their hearts forever marked by the lesson of that evening. Inside, the waitress wiped her eyes again. The manager placed a hand on his chest, feeling the weight of his regret. The busboy smiled faintly, knowing things would be different from now on. And slowly, one by one, the customers began to speak quietly, not with judgment this time, but with reflection and warmth. The lesson had been given. And no one in that diner would ever forget it. The night air outside was calm as Keanu walked away from the diner. His steps were slow, thoughtful, but there was no anger in his stride. Behind him, the little bell on the glass door had given its last soft ring, leaving the people inside to sit in silence and think. The city lights glowed on the wet pavement, and cars hummed by, unaware that inside a small diner, an unforgettable lesson had just been planted. News of what had happened didn't stay inside those four walls for long. A few customers, still in shock, had quietly recorded parts of the scene on their phones. Not for gossip or mockery this time, but because they felt the world needed to see what they had seen. By the next morning, clips began spreading online. People watched in disbelief as Keanu Reeves, a man known worldwide, sat humbly in a booth, asking only for soup, only to be denied because of how he looked. The video showed him sitting calmly, his words simple but powerful, "So you don't serve the homeless in my diner?" Within hours, the story became a storm. Social media filled with posts about the incident. Some expressed outrage at the waitress and manager, while others praised Keanu's patience and dignity. Headlines appeared in news sites across the world, not about a movie role, not about a premiere, but about kindness, dignity, and humility. The diner itself became a symbol overnight. People wanted to see the place where the lesson was taught, and many began to call it the Diner of Compassion. But for Keanu, it was never about the publicity. He had not planned for anyone to record, nor did he seek attention. For him, it was about something deeper. He wanted to remind people that kindness is not optional. It is necessary. The real success of that night was not the headlines, it was the change in the people who had been inside the diner, and the ripple it sent out into the world. Back inside the diner, the staff were shaken. The waitress who had once mocked him now worked with her head lowered, greeting every customer with a genuine smile. She apologized often, not out of fear, but because her heart had truly been changed. She told her co-workers, "I judged too quickly. I will never do that again." The manager, once proud and cold, now took time to personally greet customers at the door. He reminded the staff daily that every person deserved respect. The busboy, who had been afraid to speak, was praised by Keanu himself when he returned quietly a week later. "You have courage," Keanu told him with a smile. "One day, that will take you far." The boy's face lit up with pride, and not long after, he was promoted. The diner itself began to change. Word spread, and more people visited, not just for the food but for the story. Customers came from nearby neighborhoods, then from other towns, even from faraway cities, just to sit in the booths and remember the lesson. They came hoping to feel a piece of the humility that Keanu had shown. Some customers even paid extra, leaving money on the table for the next person who might not be able to afford a meal. The diner began to carry an atmosphere of warmth, as though Keanu's presence had left behind a piece of his spirit. One evening, weeks after the incident, an elderly man entered the diner. His clothes were old, his shoes worn thin, and his hair messy from the wind. At another time, before that unforgettable night, he might have been turned away. But this time, the waitress who once had mocked Keanu hurried forward with a smile. She guided him to a booth, brought him water, and placed a warm bowl of soup in front of him before he even ordered. The old man's eyes filled with tears as he whispered, "Thank you. I haven't been treated like this in a long time." Other customers who witnessed it clapped softly, not for the food, but for the kindness. It was proof that the diner had truly changed. It was no longer just a place to eat. It had become a place of dignity, where every person was welcomed. Keanu visited from time to time, sometimes quietly in disguise, sometimes openly. Each time, he was greeted not as a celebrity, but as the man who had turned cruelty into compassion. The busboy always stood a little taller when Keanu walked in, proud to know he had been part of something larger than himself. The staff worked harder, not out of fear of being judged again, but because they wanted to honor the lesson they had learned. One evening, a journalist asked Keanu why he hadn't fired the manager and waitress on the spot. His answer was simple: firing them would have ended the story. Forgiving them gave the story life. People don't grow when they are punished. They grow when they are given a chance to change. His words spread just as widely as the video itself, leaving people in awe of his humility. Families who visited the diner told their children the story. Parents pointed to the booths and said, "This is where Keanu Reeves taught the world about kindness." Children listened with wide eyes, learning a lesson that no classroom could teach. The little boy who had spoken up that night became a small hero too. His mother often told him, "You were right to ask. You reminded me not to be silent." His innocent courage became part of the story, just as important as Keanu's. The diner grew busier, but it never lost its heart. It stood as a quiet reminder that humanity is judged not by wealth or fame, but by the way we treat those we think have nothing. And slowly, the lesson spread beyond the walls of that small building. Other diners, restaurants, and shops heard the story and reminded their staff to treat everyone equally. It was a ripple, moving outward, touching lives far beyond that night. For Keanu, life went on. He continued his work, his films, and his quiet acts of generosity that often went unseen. But every time he thought of that night, he felt a mix of sadness and hope. Sadness that such cruelty had been spoken, but hope that it had been transformed into compassion. He knew the world was not perfect, but he also knew that every act of kindness pushed it a little closer to what it could be. The story of Keanu Reeves at his diner became more than a headline. It became a parable told around dinner tables, classrooms, and online communities. People repeated the words, "Kindness costs nothing, but its value is endless." Those who had once laughed or judged now told others about the importance of humility and respect. And so, a simple night, a simple bowl of soup, became something greater. It became a story that reminded people across the world that no matter how someone looks, no matter what we assume about them, dignity and kindness must always come first. The diner remained standing, not just as a business, but as a symbol. People who walked through its doors no longer saw just chairs, booths, and menus. They saw a place where a man, mistaken for less than he was, had taught them all what it meant to be truly human. And though Keanu himself never boasted about it, never spoke of it more than necessary, the world never forgot. His quiet dignity that night lived on, reminding countless hearts that the greatest power any person can hold is not fame, nor money, but the ability to choose compassion over judgment.